Well, I'm delighted to have Ellis Kirkdorffer as my guest. Ellis lives in Dallas, where she teaches interior design and art foundations at Texas Christian University and the University of North Texas. She's married with two awesome kids and two giant Great Pyrenees dogs. Are both dogs giant, or is one a
Yes.
puppy? So you have
Well,
a
the house full of puppies. They're both puppy-like. They're 3 and 8 years old, so but they
okay.
never kind of outgrow that puppy stage.
Yes. So you have lots of dog, lots of hair,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of love from Great Pyrenees. So
Yes,
that's wonderful.
indeed.
So she's taught higher education for over 5 years and was a practicing architect for 12 years prior to that. So she has a unique wealth of practical professional experience that she has now brought into the classroom where she teaches, where she shares that with students. And also we'll be talking about where she's also been sharing that with other educators, because she has a unique approach to teaching because of her research and her background and everything. And that's one of the things that made it so interesting when we started to connect on some things. Her approach to teaching is so interesting and effective and so close to what we are proponents of at KEVA Plank. And she does use KEVA planks in some of the activities that she does. But today we may be talking some about KEVA planks, but also a lot of the general concepts of the benefits of block play and play in general, and why those things matter. So anyway, Ellis, thanks for being here with me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, last month, I know you presented at the Interior Design Educators Council annual meeting in New York. And that was for educators from around the world that all came together. And I know you did a presentation there that was rather unique. And so I thought we'd start just hearing about what that was. I'd like to hear a little bit about how you ended up going there. I don't know whether you volunteered or whether you were invited to do something, and how you came up with what sort of activity you'd be doing. And then we'll go from there to find out what actually happened once you got there.
I submitted an abstract from the encouragement of Amy Roll, who's the program coordinator at TCU. Just from her, she taught a section of 3D foundations that it was a course that I developed. And so we used KEVA planks in that course. She said, you really should submit this to IDEC. And I said, okay. Mm-hmm. And to my surprise, that was the first time I had submitted anything, and it was accepted. So the activity that we did, it's something I developed with first year interior design students when I introduced plan and elevation. So plan is like looking down like a bird's eye, and then elevation is a side view. And that's just new terminology, and there's a lot to get used to, and you need to practice before you can draw those sorts of views. And so that was at the beginning of my graduate school that I realized that was an issue that I was running into. So my graduate research came from that issue in interior design studio. And so I started looking into toys.
And when you said that issue, were you talking about them not being very skilled at doing that sort of thing, that was a difficult thing for them to grasp?
Yes. So when I taught as an adjunct professor the first year, the students that I was working with had already been through all the foundations, and they had been through the first drawing for interior design course and submitted their portfolios, and they were accepted into the program. So they had been exposed to plan and elevation, but just sort of, I think, probably from the vocabulary that I was using that they weren't used to, they were kind of like, what? Just kind of in shock. Even though I'd seen a portfolio, so I knew they knew how to draw it, but it was just the terminology. So that's what started me on researching something to help with that 3D visualization process and translation. So that led me to develop this activity with KEVA planks, because KEVA planks were at the time, and I haven't seen anything different yet, were the only toy or game that shows a flat 2-dimensional drawing or design that then you do a 3D build from. So everything else I found was sort of like a 3-dimensional perspective kind of view. And that doesn't really help translating 2-dimension to 3-dimension. So I just got some KEVA planks and tried them with that studio that year. And it made a really big difference in their ability and their confidence, but just the ability to go back and forth from thinking of something in 3D and then providing a two-dimensional drawing for it and vice versa. So I developed an activity called Builder Communicator, for lack of better words, and just sort of clarity to the students of what we were doing. So I would project a KEVA challenge card up to one side of the classroom, and everybody at the beginning, the first round, everybody is doing this together, and, looking at the two-dimensional drawings and then trying to figure out how to build. And it takes some time.
And let me stop you there. Is the card that you're showing one of the either the Brain Builder or the 3D challenge cards where it has 3 views of the same view?
Yes.
And you have to put those together to come up with what it actually is. So that's the card that you're showing is 3 views of the same object.
Yes. Okay. So 2 elevation views or side views and 1 top view or plan view. And I think it's helpful for starting out with the terminology that we can say the top view means plan. And it's a nice reminder to them of what's the difference. So everyone in the class is looking and they're all building the same thing. And I tell them to talk to each other, and it's okay to look at what your neighbor's doing and ask questions of how did you figure that out. And then the next step, they pair up, and I have them decide who's going to be the builder and who's going to be the communicator. So every builder has to go to the opposite side of the table, so their back is facing the projection screen. And I put up a new card, and the only rule for all of the rounds, but the first most important rule is that the communicator who's giving directions cannot say, "It looks like a chair," right? So they're giving step-by-step instructions on how to construct or how to place the planks based on the card without describing what they think the end product is. And for the most part, at the beginning, nobody can quite visualize what the product is supposed to be. They're just like, okay, it looks like you're going to lay down 3 planks this way, and they can use their hands and they can point. They can say no, rotate, that sort of thing. So that's the first round. So then they trade places so that everybody has a chance to be the communicator and everybody has a chance to be the builder. And then I don't put a time limit on it. I just wait for everyone to be finished so that because the pressure is really for the educator to be able to help them understand plan and elevation and how do you get from one to the other. And so no time limit. And, and at first it's a little bit, I think, stressful for, whoever ends up being the last one, but they get used to the fact that it's not a race. So everybody switches. So everyone has a chance to be the builder and everyone has a chance to be the communicator. So that's round 1 is everyone. Round 2 is builder, communicator. And then round 3, and I don't always do this on the same day. We're sort of progressively working through the semester, but the 3rd round, the builder has their back to the card. And then the communicator, I say, raise your hands if you're the communicator. Raise it really high. And then I say, now sit on your hands. And so everybody has to sit on their hands. And that really slows down their process. And I'm talking with my hands now. It really forces everyone to think through what the directions are because they can't point at the plank and say, now move that one, rotate that one. Oh, but I forgot that one of the most important things. At the end of every round, I write up on some paper that everyone can see or a board or something. I have them shout out what were the words that you guys used to help get the final arrangement correct. And it's interesting because, nobody wants to volunteer at first. And I'd say these are not going to be real spatial words. These are not, technical terms, but how did you get your partner to move these in the right direction? And what questions did the builder ask that prompted them to get basically the right answer? And so then they'll start saying things and, sometimes they're off the wall, but they start to develop a little bit of a language together. And that's, and then they'll start to build more technical and spatial kind of terms. So that's been pretty interesting. And I have them all write down all of those terms as we go. So they kind of have those to work with throughout the semester.
Writing on blueprints or instructions, they just have to convert the verbal to written. But when you're communicating long distance, you don't get your hands, you don't get to point. So that kind of forces them to deal with that.
And this actually started writing the language down. I did give credit to a pair of students that I had in one of my early design studios where I was just testing this out in grad school. And they were from two different countries, and their language of origin was so opposite, and they were both not as comfortable in their English and spoken English. And they were like, can you please give us a list of words to use? Because without our hands, we can't do this. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. So that's when I had everyone start to shout out the words that they used to help those students. And then I provided them with a document, like the entire class with a document, basically prepositions and sort of spatial terms. Anyway.
This is interesting because the activity that you're describing with these college students is essentially the same activity that I'm teaching to first grade teachers to do with first graders. It's the exact same thing. First graders doing it. They may be using different words or whatever, but they're doing the same thing that you're doing. And it strikes me that this task seems easy, but it's so difficult for most people to get started with. And so wherever you are, if you've never done it before, if you're a first grader or a college student, if it's your first time, it can be kind of hard. And I first noticed that when I was developing these cards, because I started to do something like this at professional development workshops with teachers with KEVA planks. And so I developed what I thought were pretty easy cards, and I would hand those out at the beginning for teachers to do. And about half of the teachers would look up and say, I have no idea what this is going on.
Yeah.
And so I had to make them simpler and simpler. So I had things with just like 7 planks. And I would tell them, you can flip it over and look and learn that, because I'd gotten used to it, but for the average person, it is much more difficult than we would expect.
Well, and so that's how organically how I got to that activity. But when that's what I did at the conference, the IDET conference. So it was all interior design educators and all with much more experience than I have as far as being in the classroom. And it was so interesting that I had several comments afterwards where they participated in the activity. So it was groups of 10, and they rotated around 3 different stations. So I had 3 different groups and 10 educators. And several people came up to me and were like, that was much more difficult than I expected it to be. But they were really interested in that. I mean, because this is what we're all teaching, but it was just an interesting, because we're kind of going backwards. Because in architecture and interior design, we think of an idea and then we translate it to 2-dimensional drawings and give it to someone to build. But then having to think like a builder or a contractor and seeing these 2-dimensional drawings and then coming up with a 3-dimensional object is, almost counterintuitive to the way that we work. But so it seems like it's a difficult task for everyone when they start.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important to break it down to something this simple, where all the pieces are the same and there aren't that many of them. And it doesn't take all that long to do this, because with most skills that we're developing, you don't develop the skill by doing it once or twice. You have to keep doing it. So this at least gives you several repetitions, even with what you were doing with the 3 different things. If you do all 3 of those in one day, they've at least got to do it 3 times. And if it was a bigger, more complex thing with more objects, it just creates more opportunities for confusion, where you just need the core skill of the mind starting to tie these things together.
And I have used after implementing the KEVA planks and the challenge cards into the studio, then later in the semester, I'll have them use the KEVA planks to do a preliminary model and to test out, what works and what doesn't. 3D modeling has been on the scene for quite a while. And I think sometimes students kind of push back on physical modeling, like building models. And what's interesting is that, a computer program doesn't immediately inform you that that's going to fall down. Gravity doesn't exist there. And so by having them do these preliminary models with KEVA planks, they're already familiar with them and how they stand up and sort of the physics of them. And they immediately get notified if that idea is not really as solid as you think it is, So it's a good test method too.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a lot more students coming up through the pipeline to your level who may have, there's probably students now, even at the college level, that played with blocks and physical things much less than you and I did when we were growing
Yes.
up. And so I know there's been some research with the benefits of block play that when young children miss out on
Mhm.
that, then it affects their ability to think three-dimensionally and doing these
Yes.
more complex things. And if they didn't do it when they were young, oftentimes they haven't done it the rest of the time, because
Right.
very
And
young is when most people start playing with blocks.
but it's interesting that you say that because that was, when I was in graduate school and doing the research, one of my professors was like, well, it could be that no one's done research in adults because their brains are fully developed. And I just had this like nagging sense that that wasn't really the case. So I did all of this like exhaustive literature review, and there hadn't been any research in adults. And they're just coming to learn that that part of the adult brain doesn't ever stop growing if you don't stop feeding it, right? So these sorts of exercises are still beneficial to people who grew up maybe not playing with blocks and don't have the best spatial skills, that you can continue to develop those. Anyway,
So you're saying that it's, from what you found, it's not too late if young people missed out on that. It's a growth mindset thing. You don't have this
yes,
skill and you can learn it and you can move on from there.
absolutely.
So we aren't, even children who have been placed in front of a screen way too much at a young age, there's still hope for them that,
Mm-hmm.
that they will,
Yes,
when
absolutely.
they get the opportunity to do physical things. But oftentimes, especially in a college environment, you're not doing that sort of thing. It's all on the screen. Your notes,
Yes.
your computer aided design, and everything becomes that. And so, very few people think of bringing blocks into a college
Yeah.
classroom. So that was,
And the students are usually like, well, taken aback a bit in the first class because in the 3D class that I'm teaching at TCU that we've developed, there is no software. The only thing that they use a computer for is to upload their homework, which they do not during class. And so that's something that's very difficult for them to get used to. Like we don't even, for the most part, I don't have them type any responses. It's all sketches and building. And that's not how they're used to learning at this point. But I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. And then also just data wise, Dr. So Yoon Yoon redeveloped the Purdue test of spatial visualization. And during grad school, I connected with her and she gave me permission to use that for my research. And I continued using it just as a benchmark. So none of this information will be published, but the first activity that we do in this 3D studio is they take that spatial visualization test. And then again, that's the final. And the students never find out what their score was, because I think that's really important. Just as far as the growth mindset also, like I'm not interested in them knowing what their spatial ability is. But last semester we had 60 students take it, and one student scored the same, and everybody else at least improved by a percentage point after this studio where KEVA Planks is the first thing that we do. And, that's the focus of the first part of the semester. And so I think that's really interesting.
yeah.
I've also had in the activities that we do, another thing that I forgot to mention to you in my grad school, the exhibition that I did, like I had posters, but I really wanted to draw people in. So I got boxes from Uline that are the same proportions as KEVA planks. And so I had them out in this gallery with the cards printed really like big enough for people to see. And people would actually come and build like life-size versions of the KEVA constructions. And it changes it, it's the scale is different. And so my students really enjoy doing that too. In the spring, we go out and stack up boxes, and it's pretty cool.
So how big were those boxes roughly? The giant ones?
4 feet long, 4 feet long
Oh,
by,
wow.
I don't know, 13 inches wide by 4 inches deep. I'll send you
Wow.
pictures. I think he
Okay.
would appreciate it. I thought of that this
Wow.
morning. I was like, I should have sent him those.
That is massive. We've played with that, and I've made blocks, foam blocks for museums. I got as long as like 3 feet with blocks, and it was really fun. but it takes up a lot of space, especially
It
in a
does.
museum or a classroom or whatever. So you were doing it as a one-off thing of.
Yeah. So I did it for my exhibition display at UNT. And then I didn't know what to do because, I mean, they were big, they took up space, and they were not, boxes, cardboard is not cheap. And so then I went to teaching at TCU and I donated them to TCU. We keep them kind of stacked in one single row along the wall when we're not using them. Anyway, so it's really fun. But I'll send you some pictures. And it's endearing to see the excitement of, 18, 19, 20-year-olds getting to play. And when it's life size, it's so different and you experience, what it's like. And especially if you're going into interior design or architecture, you've got this drive to create something and the things that you're creating are bigger than you, but you don't really experience the full process of it until you're a professional, right? You don't get to really put your stamp on things. So it's really neat to see like the faces light up when they've made something or they read the plans right and it works.
We'll wrap up today's episode here, but be sure to tune in next week as we continue this conversation.